Okay, are we rolling?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me start out. This is June 12th, 2015, and I am Tom Blanchard. And with me is Loretta Sherritt. And we will be interviewing Ruby Green. Ruby SWIGERT, not Ruby Green. My apologies, Ruby. I had known Ruby Green for a number of years, and she corrected me a number of times on how to pronounce Vienna. She put you in your place when you made a mistake historically. Ruby SWIGERT, and Ruby has been associated with the Chalice area for her full life, and we'll just begin. Ruby, why don't you begin telling us from the beginning your life history, very briefly, where were you born, growing up as a young child, marriage, where you went to school. So let's start out and then we'll just prompt some questions.
Okay, you want to start with me?
Yeah.
The first thing I would like to say is that my parents were Italian immigrants who came to America to find a better life, and they had 6 children. I was one of the last 2. I was born in at the family home at Birch Creek on the dining room table. I've lived in Chalice all my life, except for when I went away to school and worked elsewhere. My parents when they first came, they lived up on the East Fork of the Salmon River. My first 4 siblings were born there. My father worked in the mines until he earned enough money to go into partnership with another Italian for some land, and they started a little farm, I guess. I don't know what they raised at that time. But from there, then he moved on down to the Chalice area on Birch Creek to a small ranch there where he had a herd of sheep. And so I grew up around sheep and little lambs for a long time before they went into the cattle business.
This is the Piva family.
That was the Piva family, yes.
And eventually...
Eventually they bought a ranch below Chalice and got into the cattle business big time with property they bought in Stanley, yes.
So they had a big ranch in the Stanley area?
They had just ranch land where they grazed their cattle.
And that was summertime grazing?
That was summertime grazing, yes. And in the wintertime, the cattle were all trailed from Stanley to Chalice along the Salmon River, and the winter was spent in Chalice.
Now, there was quite a large Italian community here.
Oh, yes, there were a lot.
Can you describe that a little bit?
One of the Padrini family lived up East Fork. I knew them, and my parents were the only Italians that I know of who actually told their children they had to speak English and not Italian. And the other family, the Padrini family, and then the Cominati family, and the Maraffio family, all had children who mostly learned their English when they started school. My father and mother both taught themselves to speak and write English. My mother always put H's where they didn't belong and left them off where they were supposed to be. And we always used to tease her about that. But they both could speak English and they both could write English.
And insisted that you...
And insisted that all of us did, yes.
When did they, what year did they come in here?
My father came and arrived in 1904, and he and my mother had just known each other as kind of childhood boyfriend, girlfriend, and she was only 15 when he left Italy. He was 18 when he left, 19 when he got here. And he was here for, from 1904 till about 8 or 9 years before one day he his sister in Italy told my mother that she'd had a letter from my father, and so my mother said, well, tell Pietro then, hello, when you write back. When he got the hello, he sent back a proposal of marriage and $75, I think, to come to Idaho and get married.
Now, did they know that they were headed to Idaho when your father came? Did he know where he was going?
You know, that is something that I never really, they might have told us, and I don't remember because as a little child, I think that they were just with other people who were heading for the mining country, because they had known evidently other people who had come to this part of the country and had corresponded. So they evidently had some idea, and they just got on the train and rode it to the end of the line, which was Mackay.
Walked in from there. Yeah. All right. Now, where did you go to school at?
I went to school in Challis High School. I was valedictorian of my class. And then I spent 2 years at the University of Oregon.
And what was your?
I was studying Romance languages. I had studied Spanish in high school, so I had Spanish, French, and Italian. And I don't speak any of them anymore. Very little Italian, although I can understand it.
Yeah. Now, you though were in the BAYHORSE area as a young child.
As my parents lived here on the little ranch on Birch Creek, and they were good friends with the caretakers here, Jimmy and Margaret Sullivan, who lived here. And so they used to visit a lot. So as little girls, my sister and I used to come and spend maybe a week with the Sullivans in the summertime. And that's how I got to know them.
And you were how old?
Oh, I was probably 9 or 10, and my sister 8.
So this is kind of childhood.
These are childhood memories that I have of Bayhorse, because we used to come up to Bayhorse Lake, Little Bayhorse, which at that point was called Brickyard Lake.
Because the brick factory.
Because of the bricks there, yes. And so we used to go up there and picnic and go fishing. I had older brothers that we went up there with, yes. My mother had a huge garden, so at that point in time she used to sell vegetables to the mine here, and her two brothers, my Uncle Ed and Uncle Felix, both had come over from Italy, but they were the ones who wanted to make some money here and then go back home.
Okay.
But they worked in the mine, yes.
Here in BAYHORSE?
Here in BAYHORSE, I think, yes.
Was it the Ram's Horn or Don?
That I don't know. I don't know which one started first. Could have been the Ram's Horn. I don't know.
Now,
but one of my uncle's his wife was the cook at the Ram's Horn. I know that. So they probably were working from the Ram's Horn.
Had to meet her somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, did you work with your mother selling vegetables?
No, I was too little.
Okay, too young. Okay.
My youngest brother was 10 and a half years older than I. My younger sister and I were a couple of accidents, I think. That's what my brothers always said.
And, okay, then you finished school in Challis, you go on to the University of Oregon, and then you come back here?
I came back here, and there was a shortage of teachers at that time, so I came back here. The superintendent in Challis asked me to come back for a year and teach. So I came on a provisional certificate and taught for 1 year. Taught Spanish and English and history. And then I made the mistake of getting married. So I didn't go back to college. And that marriage didn't last too long. I did have a son and a daughter from that marriage who were very precious. But my husband and I were divorced, as Dick and his first wife were also divorced.
Well, now, when did you run into Dick?
Well, Dick and I went to school together,
Uh-huh.
but I never did. He was, I think, about 2 grades ahead of me, but I always, in high school, he was a basketball player, his brother was a basketball player, so I always knew he was when I was a freshman, he was a junior. And so I knew him all through high school, but we didn't go together. He had a girlfriend then.
Yeah. And this is
We were friends.
This is Dick SWIGERT.
Yes.
Just for the record.
Yes, this is Dick SWIGERT. Yes.
Yeah.
Back on.
Okay, we're back on. I wanted to go back for a minute because you were talking about the Italian community. There was another large Italian community in the Coeur d'Alene area. So I know that Italians had come here in blocks in the early 1800s, 1880s to go up there, and that might have been where some of that. Now, was your family Catholic?
Were they what?
Catholic?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm curious because Idaho had a very difficult period
Yes.
in anti-Catholicism. Did you see any of that?
We didn't. They didn't have a Catholic church here, or up East Fork or Clayton, at that time. So, actually, my parents never went to church. Although if they did go to church, there was an Italian family in Mackay that that's where they were married, at their home. And once in a while, when they went to visit them, the priest would come, and my sister and I were baptized there, Catholic. So they did see the priest occasionally, but not a lot.
This would be a circuit riding priest.
I think so, yes,
Catholic
because there was no Catholic church in Chalice.
Well, let's talk about, let's see, your childhood play. Let's give us as a kid, what did you do here in BAYHORSE?
Well, when I came to BAYHORSE, it was just visiting, and actually didn't do much of anything except my little sister and I used to crawl through all the old buildings and dig around.
Yeah.
The Sullivans used to tell us stories about the Chinese people who lived here, and they said they had a separate burial ground for the Chinese, and I don't know where it was, but Margaret Sullivan used to tell us she could hear the Chinese singing at night sometimes.
Now, the Sullivans ran...
See, when the Sullivans were here, I don't know if Eileen was never here when I was here.
But her family came
Her
about the
family
same
were
time the
here
Peoples did.
before, and they were not related to the caretaker, who was also a Sullivan.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he came from...
Two different Sullivans.
Yes, he came from Chicago.
So, playing around here, we just,
We were just around.
kids
Yeah,
running around.
just running around.
And this place was, how many people were here then?
Oh, the Sullivans were caretakers. The SWIGERTs lived in the manager's house here. And when Jim Salisbury came, there was a little house right next to the hotel, just a little house that he used to stay in. But there weren't that many people. The people the miners who worked here drove back and forth.
Where did they come from mostly?
Mostly, the ones that I knew, some of them that are in this picture were locals.
Chalice?
Yeah, Chalice.
I mean, were they living on ranches and coming in here and mining? Okay.
They didn't live in BAYHORSE.
Yeah.
Now I have my older sister when he worked here for a while, but
The Postboy is part of the Ramshorn group.
it's below the and it's below the Ramshorn.
But it was controlled by the Ramshorn.
Yes, but it was they worked there. They were there for a while, but nobody. The SWIGERTs lived here, and the others, as far as I know, none of the others did.
Well,
I think some of the Sullivans may have, but that was before I I'm sure they did live here, but I don't know about that.
And what, roughly what year are we talking about here? If you were
Well,
10
let's
years
see.
old?
If I was 10 years old, I was born in 28, so that must have been
38.
about 1930. Yeah, that's very possible because the Sullivans, Jimmy Sullivan had bought a new 1939 Chevrolet business coupe. It was chocolate brown, and I can remember how proud he was of that vehicle. He drove it until he died. I had several trips to Salmon in it with him and his wife when they'd go to, that was the big city
It
in
would be
those
a big
days.
thrill.
That
man.
was,
I mean,
yeah.
A car like that going to
Oh,
Salmon.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, let's think about it. How many, when you said the miners came in here, how many do you think were working in the area? I mean,
See, you know, there were a lot of mining claims up at the Riverview and up at Juliet Creek. I think there were some up there. At one time, I just never did see the miners that much, so I never did really know. And I wasn't into the SWIGERT family at that time. I didn't know anything about them either. It was mostly the caretaker and the fact that, and my relatives, the two uncles and aunt, when I was here, they were already gone from here. They had gone back to Italy. Actually,
so they had mined here to make money so that they could go back.
and what they did when they came here, they joined the army in World War One, and they became naturalized American citizens when they joined the army. Yes, yes, and then they went back, and eventually they both came back, but they. And my one uncle brought his family, and he stayed, and the other uncle, his family were in Italy, so he went back. They didn't come. Although he had his oldest daughter was born here. His wife came here with him. She was the one who cooked at the Ram's Horn.
Was the cook up there?
Yes, and they had a daughter who was born here. But she went back. They went back to Italy, and then they were there. But my uncle, that uncle, spent a lot of time in California too. He went down there and worked with a nephew who had a winery, and I don't know what all he did. But his family had gone back to Italy.
Now, were you working when you were married?
I had a grocery store.
A grocery. That's what I understood. You were doing food industry, and in Chalice.
It's called the Weisby Market.
Okay, and that was your business. So
It was my business.
You were independent of the mining
Yes.
and ranching industry. You were running a grocery business.
Yes.
Ruby, where was that located?
It was located right across from the telephone, Custer Telephone.
Oh, where they're
that
gonna...
big, where they tore the building
Right.
down.
Oh, so that was yours.
Originally, it was a small store that my father first built, and then when my parents died, I inherited that property along with their little house, and that's when I was in the grocery business in the little store until I got married, and then finally got out of the business after we were married.
Oh, so you discontinued being running a grocery store during your early marriage?
Yeah, but I still owned the property, and I leased it out, and eventually tore that building down and built a bigger grocery store, which I sold to Custer Telephone after the last lessor. After it was paid for, and he left, I sold it to Custer Telephone.
So you owned the building that
But
just got torn down?
I owned the building. Well, they owned it then, but I had originally owned it.
Oh,
Yes.
how neat.
And is that where the new warehouse is being
Yes.
Yes,
built? Okay, yeah, we know where that location is.
on Main Street. That's
Now,
neat.
your family owned that. Does this evolve out of your mother's selling vegetables?
No, my father built it for a friend that needed a job, so he built the store. And one of my uncles helped to build it because they were builders. So it was kind of a family building thing. And then my father he never did run the grocery store. He had it leased out until they left it to me. Then I came back and went into the grocery business. And they were in the ranching business at that time. But they had retired and moved into Chalice, and so my 3 older brothers were the ones who had the ranching. Yes.
Yeah. So then you remarry. And what year roughly?
I got married in 1957.
57 to get SWIGERT. And then did you have any job occupation?
I was still in the grocery business at that time.
At that time. And how long did you continue in that grocery business?
Until I got pregnant with our first son, and I couldn't butcher the meat anymore. It made me sick. So, it was probably about 1958 or 9 that I sold it.
Yep. And then you were housekeeper, wife, or did you have another business after
No,
that?
no, didn't.
Nothing after that.
I used to substitute at school. Oh yes, I worked for community cable television when it first came to Chalice in the office, but that was something I could do while my children. That was after my husband died.
Now, when you were a grocer, were you any aware of doing business with some of the miners up in this area, or selling to the cookhouses?
I sold to large ranchers, and I sold, I'm sure, to the miners that were here. I sold to the SWIGERTs. Actually, Alice used to come and help me after I was married. But I wasn't aware that they were doing it, no.
And it wasn't like it was a contract opportunity
No.
for you. Okay, and that's what I'm trying to figure out business relationships
No.
there, and to the degree to which
people just shopped there.
families came in and bought stuff rather than the boarding house.
That's
having
right.
a place to order.
That's right.
About 59. Let's see now. Let's talk a little bit about the SWIGERT family and when I know that they were certainly working here about 1939, and that would have been the time you were saying they lived here.
Yes.
As the manager, and he was running the BAYHORSE mines at that time, which would have been the Ramshorn, the Pacific Group,
The Post Boy, I think, was.
Post Boy, the Riverview, and I think he had the Beardsley.
Beardsley. He had the Beardsley. I don't think he was doing the Riverview then, but he had the Beardsley.
Okay. And those mines were active as far as you know?
No, they weren't very active.
This was...
and they would be mining not more than one at a time, I don't think.
Okay.
The last one I remember that they were mining was the Pacific.
And that was later in the 70s, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, much later. So that when we're looking in 1938, 39, when they were here as managers.
Yeah, I didn't really associate with them there, here at that time.
But I think the point here is that the SWIGERT family has been deeply
yes.
involved in this area
yes.
for a long time,
Yes.
and were deeply involved when you first were aware of it, 38, 39.
Bill SWIGERT had a business in Chalice Transportation, which was, he had kind of sold gas and they worked on mechanically on vehicles for people. But he had a manager there who took care of Chalice Transportation because his love was BAYHORSE.
His love was the mines. That would be out
But
here.
the Chalice Transportation Company operated for a long time. Actually, it became more lucrative than BAYHORSE until after he died.
And that's probably the story of a lot of side businesses in mining. There's a real fun letter that Bill has written back to Salisbury, and he's thanking him for a gift that Salisbury had sent to Alice. And Alice's message to Salisbury was, you better not be spending your money on gifts because you're going to need every bit for the mines.
I can believe that, yes.
Yeah. Now, in 1950, the Swigerts joined Orange James Salisbury. And you knew the
I knew.
Salisburys. You didn't know
I
he was
just knew
Orange.
him. I just knew Jim Salisbury. Yes.
Jim or OJ.
Yeah, OJ. Everybody called him OJ or Jim, yes. I never knew his full name. You told it to me. That's the first I knew of it.
That it was Orange. Yeah. Now, the Salisbury family had owned that mine from the beginning of Bayhorse.
Now that I did not know.
His grandfather bought the Bayhorse, the Ramshorn mine, very early, and it stayed in the family. It got passed on. Very unusual mine holding story in a sense. So Salisbury comes back in and has a business with the Swigerts that lasts for
years.
Do you know when it finally is? That when they sell to Dooley? Is the end of that? Dooley Wheeler?
Well, the Umont mine. Yeah, I remember that it was. They were all involved in it, but I can't tell you what year it was.
Okay.
But I was married to Dick at that time. We had a family.
And what can you tell us about Jim Salisbury?
He was tall, very tall man. And whenever he came to he had lots of meals at our house, as well as with Bill and Alice. He always brought goodies for my children and a couple of bottles of Riesling wine from California. He belonged to the Bohemian Club in San Francisco. And he always brought us their name brand of wine. He was a good friend.
Yeah. Now, he was a financial investor.
I guess.
In mines. His family actually made a fortune in the West as they were freighters and stagecoach operators who then made money and invested in mines and banks and so have been prominent business people with major headquarters in Salt Lake and in Idaho Falls.
Jim Salisbury had a property. I forgot what it is. He had property out of Idaho Falls on Henry's Lake.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, he used to spend a lot of time at Henry's Lake.
Was this a ranch, a recreational? Because he talks about going to the ranch.
Well, that was Henry's Lake.
Okay.
I was never there, so I don't know how big it was, but that was his Idaho home.
He seemed to try and get in here quite frequently.
Oh, he did. He came.
How often?
I don't know, several times a year.
So he's coming from San Francisco to Salt Lake to his ranch here to Bayhorse and
traveled a lot.
Traveled a lot.
Yes.
And with a lot of businesses. He had quite a bit of business in Salt Lake.
I think so. Yes. And I think they still owned the Salisbury building in Idaho Falls, and I don't know what they did with that either.
I know he had an interesting letter that he talks about paying bills, and he writes that he hopes that they're getting a lot of good ore because he just got this bill, and it was hard to scrape up the money, and times were tough. I mean, $1,000 was a big amount of money back then, and he found $1,000 almost stopped the operation. I mean, he was nervous.
Yeah. Yes.
I do have a question along that line. A lot of the documents that you have donated, there always seemed to be an urgency for funds. Did you ever want them to just walk away and just be done with the whole mining business?
No, because most of that was before my time with them. And they seemed to be managing quite well at the time that I became a SWIGERT. But I never, I didn't have anything to do with their business at all.
Right. But it didn't seem to be a financial drain for
No,
them.
not really.
Okay.
Not that I recall.
In fact, there are periods in which I think the SWIGERT family did quite well up here.
Oh, yes.
I think the production during World War II was quite high, and paid quite well. And then if you have a backer that pays,
That's
you're
right.
the manager.
That's right. Yeah.
You get your salary, so it works. Now, it eventually sells to Umont Mining, and that was headed up by Dooley Wheeler, and you knew Dooley. Why don't you tell us what you know about Dooley Wheeler?
Dooley was a very great guy, but he was a stickler for detail. And Jenny, his wife, was actually she's the one that wrote everything out for him. She was his secretary. He was a perfectionist. And the thing that I remember about Dooley, which tickles me the most, is he wanted to learn to dance. He couldn't dance. And he wanted to learn to dance. So he built a dance room in their basement in Salt Lake City with a big mirror on the wall. And he and Jenny learned to dance. Jenny knew how to dance, but she had to teach Dooley how to dance. Jenny used to say, oh, we had another dancing lesson today. But he was a perfectionist. Yes, he was. He wanted to be good at it. And he was that way about he was that way with his children. He and his son Norman really didn't get along that well, because I think he wanted more from Norman than he could get. And same thing with Marjorie, I think. But after they all got older and grew up, then the family was fine again. But Dooley was a hard person to deal with.
His letters have an edge to him, and the only thing important to him was finding minerals. I mean, when you read his letters, and anything that got in the way of that was nonsense.
He wrote a little I don't know what you would call it. It was a little thing, and he just finished it just before he died. He talks about Tom and Eileen Shivers a lot, and he talks a little bit about Bill and Alice SWIGERT, but it's mostly about what is an American, and he called these people great Americans. See, and if you don't have a copy of that, I have a copy.
We might. We'll check.
I think you should have.
Yeah.
It's something about Americans, and his last entry in it was just before he died in, when did he die? In
He just died
2013, yeah.
No, he just recently
He
died.
just died last year,
Yeah.
but
Okay,
yeah.
I thought it was 2 years ago. Yeah. At about 101.
I think it was either his 100th birthday or his 101st. I think it was his 100th.
Well, I know he wrote some letters to the Chalice newspaper.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Relative to the SNRA, the Sawtooth National Recreation, and what a loss that was, that we've locked up the minerals and the resources of the United States, and about use of water and how we ought to be able to sell water to homesteaders, and we need to open up the homesteaders so they can homestead here in BAYHORSE. He had very strong opinions.
Oh, yes, yes, very strong opinions.
But there seemed to be a very strong family connection.
There was a strong family connection,
and
and the SWIGERTs were very good friends. Yes, they were good friends. That's how I got to know them really well. Jenny was a lifesaver to me after my husband died. She just was great. And in fact, she was to all of us. See, they lost their son Billy, and then 8 years later, Bill was killed in the accident with the blasting. And then it was 4 years after that that my husband died in an accident. They all died accidentally.
Now,
and the Wheelers were always there for us, as well as Jim Salisbury.
It's a real close-knit relationship.
Yes.
That's an unusual story in a mining area like this. Now, just for clarity, Bill was killed in a dynamite blast accident, but he wasn't in a mine
No,
accident. He was
they
working
were
a contract,
for Salmon River Electric
and they were
Co-op.
and what,
They were putting in new power lines downriver from Chalice, north of Chalice.
and he had a defective fuse.
Yes.
And that was, we were talking about the date, trying to date that to sometime in the early 60s?
No, let's see. I think it was the early 60s. Let's see. Dickon Armor made in 57. And it probably was the early 60s. But I could tell you if I were at home, I could look it up, but I can't tell you now. Dates leave me.
But the SWIGERT family continued to be involved in the mines.
Well, and yes, and they worked with Dooley before Umont Mines purchased the BAYHORSE.
As contract.
Well, yeah, I don't know how the relationship was worked, but Dooley was here, and that's when I asked you if you knew anything about Bob Osterstock. See, he was another geologist, I think, and he used to come up here with Dooley from Salt Lake before the Umont Mines time.
Well,
Dooley was interested in it before he got Umont Mining interested in it.
Okay, in other words, he was up here before he pulled Umont in. In fact, Umont was created almost to come up here and work in this area. Because he was working for another mining...
well, see, Umont was in, I think, Utah and Montana.
Yes, and
That's where they got the name.
He says U for Utah and Mont for Montana. Combination. So after, so they continue, the SWIGERT family continues to have an interest until Dooley Wheeler buys it, but Dooley has been contracting with them for services all the way along.
I think so. I can't answer that question either because I had nothing to do with. I knew he was involved, but I didn't know how.
Yeah. Well, when I read the old mine inspector reports from the BAYHORSE mines, which was the reports were filed by Bill SWIGERT. Particularly in the 50s, it says no employees, no employees, and
they were probably just the family, other than
either that or they leased out or contracted out. So
they might have contracted out some. That I don't know. They were working up at the Pacific themselves. I know that.
So the family basically was the main labor force.
Yes.
And so it was a family business. There weren't employees as such, but there were people working there all the time, either as contractors or family members of the family business.
And they had one fellow, Glenn Mann, who eventually became the caretaker here after Jimmy Sullivan died. He lost a hand up at the Pacific in the pressure. And that was the last place they were working. And he was an employee. He was not part of the family. He was an employee there.
Paid employee. Now the Pacific, they were building a mill up there. Seems to me in the reports they're always building or repairing the mill. That happened. I mean, they're constantly changing the mill.
I don't remember a mill at the Pacific at all. There were some buildings there, but I thought they brought it to the mills down here, the ore down here. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't recall because I was only there maybe 2 or 3 times.
Now you knew Julie's son and daughter.
Yes.
And they came out here and stayed.
Hmm. They went to school here.
Oh, in Chalice?
Yes.
Okay.
They were, Wheelers were living here. And actually, they were living here in the house here. And
the mine manager's house
Yeah.
right behind us.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were living here. And they both graduated from high school here. Mhm. I think Marjorie was about 10 when they came here, and I can't remember how old Norman was.
I believe he was older.
I think he was older
He was
than
what, the
Marjorie.
first child.
Yeah, I think so.
Now, did you know him later when he?
Oh, yes.
And, do you still keep contact with him?
Yes. And
What business did he go into? Did he continue in geology or?
no, he moved to Colorado, and he was he liked to ski, and he worked as a ski patrol, and finally I think that's somewhere along in the skiing industry somehow or other. That was what he did. I didn't see him that often, but we always remained friends.
Yeah. Now, did you follow the process of the park buying this from Dooley?
No.
The state of Idaho buying this from Dooley?
No.
And some of the cleanup that's gone on around here?
No, I didn't even want to see it.
You didn't want to see it. Has
No.
this place changed dramatically as
This
a result?
place, I would not know it
Yeah.
today. No.
It's considerably different. Now,
Considerably.
Would you suggest we've lost some character?
Well, we've lost some buildings,
Yeah.
and the tailings pond looked a lot nicer than that parking lot does.
With the slag piles down there and all
Yes,
the sand and everything.
yes, yeah.
Did you happen to know Bill Ham?
No, I didn't know him. He was a caretaker up here
Yeah.
too, wasn't he? Yeah, I recognized the name, but I never did meet him.
Okay.
I think he was here after my husband died.
Yes. And in fact, up into the 90s.
Yeah. He was under Umont Mining.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dooley had hired him, and I think he had a slate.
Yes, a little slate business going. Yes.
He's the one that put the nice roof on the outhouse out there.
Oh, really? I hadn't seen that.
Oh, you need to.
I'll have to go see it.
This is the nicest outhouse in Idaho.
Does it have a fur-lined?
No, I didn't. I haven't checked the inside. I just like this. I like the slate roof. Yeah. Let's take a break here, John, and think about